He screamed at me in front of the entire gala to apologize to her or get out. I apologized by smiling, grabbing my purse, and walking out of his life like it was a house on fire. He thought he had humiliated me. He did not know that the moment I turned my back, I began documenting every breath of his deceit. I was not leaving. I was sharpening a blade made of ink and paper. My name is Rowan Callahan. I stood near the periphery of the ballroom, clutching a glass of sparkling water that I had no intention of drinking. The Ashford Harbor annual fundraising gala was in full swing, a sea of black tuxedos and designer gowns shimmering under chandeliers that cost more than my parents' entire mortgage. My husband, Graham Rourke, was the center of gravity in the room. He was the consulting star of Marrow Bridge Consulting, the man everyone wanted to know, the man who could allegedly turn failing businesses into gold mines with a single strategic restructuring plan. He looked dazzling tonight, laughing at a joke made by a potential client, his hand resting casually in his pocket. He looked like the perfect husband. Then Tessa Vale appeared. She was the new associate Graham had mentioned only once in passing. She wore a dress that was a shade of red so deep it looked like fresh arterial blood. She moved through the crowd not like a nervous new hire, but like a predator scanning for weak prey. I watched her approach me. She held a glass of Cabernet in her hand, her grip loose, almost negligent. When she reached me, she did not stumble. She did not trip. She simply tilted her wrist. The cold liquid soaked into the bodice of my cream silk gown instantly, bleeding down the fabric like a wound. Before I could even exhale, Tessa dropped her glass. It shattered against the marble floor with a violence that cut through the ambient chatter. She covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking. "Oh, God, I am so sorry. I'm so clumsy. Please forgive me," she wailed. Her voice was pitched perfectly to Carrie. It was the sound of a terrified victim, not an aggressor. Graham was at our side in less than 3 seconds. He did not look at my ruined dress. He did not ask if I was wet or cold. He did not ask what happened. He grabbed my upper arm, his fingers digging into my bicep with enough force to cut off circulation. He yanked me forward, positioning me directly in front of the sobbing woman. The music stopped. The conversation died. 200 pairs of eyes locked onto us. "Apologize to her or get out," Graham screamed. His voice was raw, a guttural roar that seemed to shake the very foundation of the hall. It was a command, stripping me of my dignity in front of the city's elite. He looked at me with eyes that held no recognition, only a cold, hard fury. He was performing. He was establishing a narrative. I felt the heat rise in my cheeks, but my blood ran cold. I looked at Tessa. Through the gaps in her fingers, I saw her eyes. They were dry. "I'm sorry," I whispered. It was the only thing I could say. Graham released my arm as if I were contagious. "Go," he spat. "Just go." I turned away. As I did, I saw Tessa lower her hands. Her lips twitched. It was a micro-expression, fleeting and sharp. She smirked. It was the satisfied look of a woman who had just successfully executed the first act of a play. I walked out of the ballroom alone. The heavy oak doors closed behind me, shutting out the murmurs of the crowd. I walked through the lobby and out into the cool night air. The valet brought our car around. I popped the trunk to toss my purse inside, needing to free my hands. That was when the second blow landed. Inside the trunk, tucked deep against the back seat, was Graham's large black suitcase. He had told me earlier that week he might have a potential business trip coming up, but nothing had been confirmed. Yet here it was, fully packed. He had brought it to the gala. He had known, before we even left the house, that I would be driving home alone. He had known he was not coming back with me tonight. I stood there in the parking lot, the wine drying sticky and cold against my skin. I am 34 years old. I spent a decade as an internal risk auditor for major corporations. My entire career was built on noticing the details that others ignored. I knew how to look at a balance sheet and see theft masked as clerical error. I knew how to listen to a CEO speak and hear the lie hidden in the pause. When a man humiliates his wife to protect a female colleague, he is not being chivalrous. He is protecting an asset. And when a man packs a bag for a trip he has not announced, he is not being prepared. He is executing an exit strategy. I got into the driver's seat and drove home in silence. The house was dark and empty. I did not go to the bedroom. I did not take a shower to wash off the wine. I went straight to the kitchen island and opened my laptop. I did not cry. Crying implies shock, and I was past shock. I was entering a state of cold, clinical focus. I right-clicked on the desktop and created a new folder. I stared at the blinking cursor for a moment. Then, I typed 2 words that would define the rest of my life. Worst nightmare. I hit enter. The folder sat there, empty and waiting. I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone to sync the cloud data. Graham thought he had won. He thought he had discarded me. He did not know that he had just handed the auditor the first file of the audit. I cracked my knuckles and began to work. The house was silent, save for the hum of the refrigerator and the frantic clicking of my trackpad. I sat at the kitchen island, the ghost of the wine stain still stiff on my dress. But I had no time to change. I was not a wife anymore. I was an auditor conducting a forensic analysis of a failing merger. I started with the calendar. I pulled up the digital family schedule and overlaid it with Graham's shared work calendar. I went back 12 months. The pattern emerged within minutes, stark and undeniable. Every single business trip was preceded by a week of manufactured conflict. He would pick a fight about the way I folded the towels or the tone of my voice when I answered the phone. He would escalate it until the air in the house was toxic, and then he would leave for 3 days, claiming he needed to focus on a client. It was clockwork. He created the storm so he could justify leaving the ship. I switched tabs to the credit card statements. Graham was careful, but arrogance makes people sloppy. He used the Platinum Family Rewards card for the points, assuming I never looked at the itemized breakdown. I scanned the last 6 months. There was a dinner for 2 at a steakhouse in Chicago on a night he claimed he was ordering room service and working on a slide deck. The bill was $450, 2 appetizers, 2 entrees, 1 bottle of Pinot Noir. Then I saw the hotel charge, the Grand Hyatt in Charleston. He said he was staying at the corporate conference center, which was prepaid by the client, but here was a charge for a king suite with a harbor view. And then, the smoking gun, a charge for a diamond tennis bracelet from a jeweler in Savannah. $2,800. I looked at my wrist. It was bare. The timestamp on the purchase was 3 in the afternoon on a Tuesday. He was supposed to be in a strategy session. I closed the laptop and walked to the home office. My heart was beating a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. I went to the shelf where we kept the old tax files. Graham never threw anything away, but he rarely looked at the old boxes. I reached behind the accordion folder labeled Tax Returns 2019. My fingers brushed against something cool and plastic. I pulled it out. A burner phone. Cheap. Black. Prepaid. I opened it. The battery was at 20%. I went to the contacts. There was only one entry. V. I did not scroll. I did not read the texts. That would change the last opened timestamp. Instead, I used my own phone to take high-resolution photos of the screen. I photographed the call log, calls at midnight, calls at 6 in the morning, calls that lasted 45 minutes. I noted the frequency, every day. I wiped the plastic casing with the hem of my dress to remove my fingerprints and placed it back exactly where I found it, lining it up with the dust outline on the shelf. I returned to the kitchen and dialed a number I had not used in 5 years. It's late. Rowan, the voice on the other end, said, I need you. Mallory. I said, Mallory Keene was a private investigator who operated out of a small office above a bakery. She was expensive, discreet, and had an allergy to emotional outbursts. "Graham is leaving tomorrow," I said, keeping my voice steady. "He has a suitcase packed in the trunk. I need to know where he goes, who he meets, and I need pictures." "Standard infidelity package," Mallory asked, her tone bored. "No," I said. "I don't just want to catch him cheating. I want to map the network. I don't need him to apologize. I need the truth to stand in the light. I'll have a car outside your house in an hour," she said, and hung up. I put the phone down. I needed liquid assets that Graham could not freeze. I opened a new browser window and navigated to an online bank. I set up a checking account under my maiden name, Callahan. I transferred $300 from our joint savings, then another $200 from the checking. Small amounts. If I moved $10,000, he would get an alert. If I moved a few hundred here and there, it looked like groceries or dry cleaning. I was bleeding him dry, drop by drop. I took a notepad and a pen. I wrote down the rules of engagement. Rule 1, no screaming. Rule 2, do not confront until the evidence is overwhelming. Rule 3, record everything. Rule 4, wait for the kill shot. I looked back at the calendar on my screen, my eyes drawn to today's date, the date of the gala, the date he screamed at me, in a subfolder of his work calendar, one he likely thought was hidden. There was an entry for tonight. Board meeting. Critical. He wasn't at a board meeting. He was at a party, humiliating his wife. And Tessa Vale was there. The board was a lie. Tessa was the agenda. And I had just realized that this entire night, this entire performance of rage, was not an accident. It was a scheduled event. Graham returned home 3 hours later. He did not slam the door. He did not storm in with the residual heat of his performance at the gala. Instead, he walked in with the loose-limbed relaxation of a man who had just won a championship game. He tossed his keys into the bowl near the door and loosened his tie, his movements fluid and easy. It was the terrifying gentleness of a predator that knows the cage door is locked and the prey has nowhere to run. I was sitting in the living room, a book open on my lap that I had not read a single word of. I looked up. I forced my face into a mask of confusion and fatigue, hiding the sharp, cold calculation that was currently running through my mind. "You're up late," Graham said, walking over to the minibar to pour himself a scotch. "I thought you'd be asleep." "I couldn't sleep," I said, keeping my voice low. How was the rest of the night?" He took a sip of the amber liquid and sighed. A perfect sound of weary nobility. Exhausting. "I had to do a lot of damage control after you left. Clients were asking questions, but I handled it. I smoothed things over." He lied with the grace of a sociopath. His story was too clean, too linear. Real life has jagged edges. His explanation was a polished stone. He was reading from a script he had written on the drive home. "Graham," I said, testing the water, "you demanded I apologize for something I didn't do." She spilled the wine on me. He turned to look at me, his expression shifting into a patronizing disappointment. He walked over and sat on the ottoman in front of me, leaning forward as if explaining a complex concept to a slow child. "Rowan, look at you," he said softly. "You're so defensive. It doesn't matter who spilled the wine. It matters how you reacted. You froze. You made her feel small. You embarrassed her in front of the partners. I had to intervene to save the mood. I embarrassed her," I repeated, letting the absurdity hang in the air. "You have been so high-strung lately," he said, reaching out to pat my knee. "I think you need rest. Maybe I should take that consulting trip to the coast for a few days. Give us both some space to breathe." I looked at his hand on my knee. I realized then that his goal at the party was not an apology. The goal was to cast me in the role of the unstable, difficult wife. He needed a villain so that when he eventually left me for the victim, he would look like a martyr who finally escaped. He was not just cheating. He was rewriting our history. Before I could answer, A small creak came from the staircase. I turned. My 7-year-old daughter was standing on the bottom step, hugging her worn stuffed rabbit. She looked small in her oversized pajamas, her eyes wide and confused. She must have woken up when Graham came in. "Mommy," she whispered, Did you do something wrong? Why was Daddy yelling at the party?" My heart stopped. She had heard him scream earlier, or perhaps she had heard us talking now. Graham stiffened, but he didn't move to comfort her. He just took another sip of his scotch. I stood up and walked to her, kneeling so I was at eye level. I smoothed her hair, my hands trembling slightly, not from fear, but from a sudden, ferocious surge of protective rage. "No, baby," I said, clearly. "Mommy didn't do anything wrong. Everything is going to be okay. Go back to bed." She looked at Graham, then back at me, sensing the invisible fracture in the room. "Okay," she whispered, and turned to go back upstairs. I watched her go. That was the moment the last ember of my love for Graham died. He was willing to let our daughter think her mother was the bad guy. I would not let that happen. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I waited until Graham went into the bathroom to shower before I checked it. It was Mallory. Subject is not at a hotel. He drove past the city limits. He is parked at 4500 River Road, the Kensington Lofts, Penthouse B. I knew that building. It was new money, flashy and overpriced. I quickly opened the property tax database on my phone. I searched for the owner of Penthouse B. It wasn't listed under an individual's name. It was owned by a corporate entity. Vale Meridian LLC. I stared at the screen. Vale. Tessa Vale. And the contact in his burner phone was just the letter V. It was so arrogant, so obvious. He wasn't just sleeping with her. He was likely financing her lifestyle, or perhaps they were laundering money together through this shell company. I did not scream. I did not throw the expensive scotch bottle against the wall. I opened my worst nightmare file and logged the time, the address, and the LLC name. I added a note next to the entry. "If he builds his house on sand, I will be the tide." Dana Huxley was the kind of family lawyer who did not keep tissues on her desk. She kept a calculator. Her office was a fortress of mahogany and leather, smelling of expensive coffee and ruthless litigation. I sat across from her, my hands folded calmly in my lap, looking less like a grieving wife and more like a CEO closing a merger. "So," Dana said, tapping her pen against a yellow legal pad, "you want to file on grounds of adultery. We can get a process server to him by Friday." "No," I said. "Do not file yet. I want to understand the entire system of money first." Dana stopped tapping. She looked at me over the rim of her glasses. Her interest piqued. "Explain. Graham thinks he is hiding an affair?" I said. "I think the affair is hiding something else. I need 48 hours to follow the cash flow." I went back to my laptop. The house was empty. Graham was on another business trip to the coast. I logged into the joint checking account again, but this time I went deeper. I ignored the hotels and the dinners. I looked at the deposits. Over the last year, there were irregular deposits labeled reimbursement travel from a firm called Blackwell and Crane Partners. They were not his employer. They were a vendor legal firm his consultancy used. The amounts were specific. $4,200. $3,800. Just under the $5,000 threshold that triggers internal compliance reviews at his bank. But the pattern was what stopped my breath. Every time a deposit hit our account, a cash withdrawal for the exact same amount happened within 24 hours. Graham was not being reimbursed. He was washing money. My phone buzzed. It was an image file from Mallory. The photo was grainy, taken from a long distance with a telephoto lens, but the faces were clear. It was a dimly lit parking garage. Graham stood next to his car. Tessa was there, looking anxious, her arms crossed tight over her chest. But there was a third person, a man in a gray suit. handing Graham a thick brown envelope. I texted Mallory, "Who is the suit?" The reply came back 2 minutes later. Arthur Pence, Chief Financial Officer of Blackwell and Crane Partners. My stomach turned. This was not just a midlife crisis. This was a conspiracy. Graham was likely approving inflated invoices for Blackwell and Crane at his consultancy, and Pence was kicking back a portion of the money to him in cash, using Tessa and these fake reimbursements as the vehicle. I needed a bigger weapon than a divorce lawyer. I picked up my phone and dialed Sloan Mercer. Sloan was an investigative journalist for the Harborline Ledger. 2 years ago, I had tipped her off about a compliance failure at a previous job, and she had never revealed her source. We met at a noisy diner on the edge of town, far from the country clubs Graham frequented. Sloan listened to me without interrupting, her eyes scanning the printouts of the bank statements I slid across the table. She took a sip of black coffee and looked at me. "Rowan," she said, her voice low, "if you have evidence of a money chain involving a vendor and a kickback scheme, this is no longer a family matter. This is corporate fraud, maybe even embezzlement. If I write this, he doesn't just lose his marriage, he goes to prison." "I know," I said. "Are you ready for that?" she asked. "Once we pull this thread, the whole sweater unravels." He screamed at me in front of 200 people to protect this lie. I said, "Pull the thread." I went home and opened the project archives on Graham's external hard drive, which he foolishly left connected to the home network. I searched for Tessa Vale. Graham had introduced her as a new associate hired last month. I found her name, but it was not in the personnel file. It was in the vendor database. Vale Meridian LLC. The entry was dated 16 months ago. She was listed as a strategic logistics consultant. She had been billing Graham's projects for over a year before she ever supposedly started working there. I sat back, the glow of the screen illuminating the dark room. The affair was not a mistake. It was a partnership. I opened my case file and typed a new entry, my fingers hitting the keys with deliberate force. Tessa did not enter my life through love. She entered by invoice. I sat in the dark living room, the only light coming from the street lamps filtering through the rain-streaked windows. The silence of the house allowed memories to surface, sharp and stinging. I thought back to a dinner party 3 years ago. Graham had interrupted a story I was telling to correct a minor detail, laughing as he placed a hand on my shoulder. He had said I was terrible with numbers. The table had laughed. I had smiled, shrinking into my chair. It was a pattern. Every time he defended someone else, or every time he corrected me in public, he was conditioning me. He was teaching me to accept a lower volume for my own voice. He was training me to be grateful for the space he allowed me to occupy. But sitting there in the shadows, I realized something that made my spine straighten. I was not a victim. I was Rowan Callahan. I had spent a decade walking into boardrooms full of arrogant men and finding the millions of dollars they tried to hide in the margins. I was a hunter of discrepancies. I had simply made the mistake of trusting the one person I was never supposed to audit. That mistake was over. I went upstairs and checked on my daughter. She was sleeping soundly, her breath steady and rhythmic. I smoothed the blanket over her shoulder. She would not know the dirt of this. She would not know about shell companies or hotel receipts. She would only know that her mother made the house safe again. I would burn the world down to keep the smoke out of her room. The next morning, I met with Dana Huxley again. She had drafted the initial separation agreement. "We can offer a standard 50-50 split of assets to speed this up." Dana suggested. "No," I said, my voice flat. "I want a clause for full forensic financial transparency. I want access to every account, every holding, and every transaction going back 5 years. If he refuses, we go to court." Dana looked at me, a small smile playing on her lips. "He will fight that. It exposes everything. I know," I said. "Let him fight." Later that afternoon, my phone pinged with a new message from Mallory. It was a photo of Tessa leaving a medical clinic holding a pamphlet. I zoomed in. It was a brochure for prenatal care. I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. Tessa was pregnant. I checked the dates again. Based on the timeline, if the baby was Graham's, it happened during the week he claimed he was at a retreat for exhausted executives. But then I looked closer at the file Mallory sent. Tessa was still posting photos of her happy marriage on social media. She was playing a double game. I knew what I had to do. This was not just about Graham anymore. There was another player on the board who was moving blindly toward a cliff. I found Evan Vale's contact information easily enough. He was an architect, a man who built sturdy, honest things. I asked him to meet me at a coffee shop near his office, a place with high booths and low noise. When he walked in, I felt a pang of pity. He looked kind. He looked tired. He looked like a man who thought his biggest problem was a deadline or a leaky roof. He sat down across from me, confusion evident in his furrowed brow. "Mrs. Rourke," he asked, I don't know why you wanted to meet. Is this about the gala Tessa told me about the accident with the wine? She feels terrible." He was apologizing for her, just like I used to apologize for Graham. I did not waste time with small talk. I placed a thick manila envelope on the table between us. Inside were the photos of the text messages, the call logs, the dates of the business trips that matched Tessa's absences, and the photo of them with the financial officer in the parking garage. "I am not here to hurt you, Evan," I said, keeping my voice soft but firm. "But you are living in a story that they are writing for you. You deserve to know the plot before they finish it." Evan stared at the envelope. He looked at me, searching for cruelty in my eyes, but he found only a mirror of his own impending grief. He reached out and opened the clasp. He read the first page, then the second. His face went pale, draining of color until he looked like paper. He stopped at the photo of the call log. His hand started to tremble, a violent shaking that rattled the paper against the table. He did not scream. He did not flip the table. He just collapsed inward, the air leaving his lungs in a long, broken exhale. She said she was working late," he whispered, his voice cracking. "She said we were trying for a baby." "She said," he trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. The betrayal was not just emotional, it was biological. It was foundational. He looked up at me, his eyes red and wet. "What do you want?" he asked. "Do you want money? Do you want to ruin them?" I looked at this broken man, and I felt a surge of cold resolve. "I want my child to be at peace," I said. "And as for them, I want them to receive exactly the consequences they have earned." Evan looked down at the photos again. He closed the envelope and placed his hand on top of it, pressing down hard as if to stop the shaking. When he looked back up, the kindness was gone from his eyes. In its place was something harder, something necessary. "Tell me what to do," he said. Evan did not join me to play the role of the vengeful spouse. He joined me because he realized he was standing on a trapdoor. When we dug into the registration papers for Vale Meridian LLC, the address listed was not an office suite. It was a virtual mailbox inside a shipping store in a strip mall 3 towns over. But the terrifying part was the money trail. The LLC was not just receiving payments, it was funneling cash into a private equity fund Graham had bragged about months ago, calling it his retirement masterpiece. "I signed these," Evan said, his voice trembling as he pointed to a stack of tax documents we had pulled from the public registry. She told me it was for a tax break on her consulting work. I didn't read them. I just signed. "That is what they counted on," I said. "If this goes down, Evan, you are the liable party on paper. You are the CEO of a shell company designed to launder stolen corporate funds." Mallory called in with the final piece of the puzzle. The equity fund was a ghost. It had no other investors. The only assets flowing in were the inflated reimbursements from Blackwell and Crane, and the only person authorizing the expenditures on the receiving end was Tessa. She was not just a mistress, she was the gatekeeper of the vault. Suddenly, the night of the gala snapped into sharp focus. I had thought Graham's scream was a moment of lost control, but I was wrong. It was a calculated maneuver. By forcing me to apologize, by branding me as the aggressor and Tessa as the victim in front of the city's elite, he was preemptively discrediting me. If I ever came forward with accusations later, he could point to that night and say I was simply a jealous, unhinged wife obsessed with destroying the innocent woman she had humiliated. He had not just protected her, he had weaponized the narrative against me. I needed to test the perimeter of their defense. I drafted an email to the internal compliance department of Blackwell and Crane. I wrote it in the voice of a confused, helpful spouse. I attached a spreadsheet of the deposits and asked for clarification on these reimbursement discrepancies, suggesting that perhaps their accounting department had made a clerical error that I wanted to help correct. The reply came less than 2 hours later. It was not a thank you. It was a warning. Mrs. Rourke, these accounts have been reviewed and flagged twice previously. The matter was closed by senior management. Please direct all further inquiries to your husband. I stared at the screen. Graham had been caught before. Twice. And someone high up at Blackwell and Crane had killed the investigation. This was not just Graham and Tessa stealing. They had a protector on the inside. If we hit them head on, they will shred everything. I told Sloan over the phone. They have administrative access. They can delete the emails, wipe the servers, and claim I forged the bank statements. Then we don't give them time to shred. Sloan said, I have the article ready. It maps the shell company, the fake vendor invoices, and the compliance cover-up. I just need you to say the word. Hold it, I said. If you publish now, they will deny it and spin it. I need a confession, or at least an admission that ties him to the intent. I hung up and looked around my kitchen. I started to prepare dinner. I roasted a chicken and set the table with the good linen. I opened a bottle of wine and let it breathe. I was setting a stage, just as he had done at the gala. But my stage was not for a public execution. It was for a private interrogation. I needed him to feel safe. I needed him to feel like the master of the house, the clever husband who had successfully managed his difficult wife. I sat at the table and waited for the sound of his car in the driveway. I rehearsed my opening line, not as a script, but as a scalpel. I was going to offer him a chance to lie, and I knew exactly which lie he would choose. The headlights swept across the front window. I poured 2 glasses of wine. The trap was set. The roast chicken was perfect. The skin was golden and crisp, seasoned with rosemary and lemon, the kind of meal that smelled like forgiveness. I had set the table with our wedding china and lit 2 tapered candles. It was a domestic stage set, designed to mimic the normalcy Graham craved. He walked in, tense at first, his eyes scanning the room for landmines. When he saw the food and my calm demeanor, his shoulders dropped. He exhaled. He thought the storm had passed. He thought he had successfully bullied me into submission and that we were returning to the status quo where he ruled and I endured. He ate with an appetite that I found revolting. I pushed the food around my plate, waiting for the wine to settle in his blood, waiting for that specific moment of post-meal lethargy where a man feels most secure. Graham, I said softly, staring at the flame of the candle, if you could choose a life with absolutely no consequences, what would you choose? He paused, his fork hovering halfway to his mouth. The question was abstract enough to be innocent, but specific enough to prick his conscience. He looked at me, his eyes darting to the left. I would choose this, Rowan, he said, his voice dripping with a manufactured sincerity. He reached across the table and covered my hand with his. His palm was warm, but it felt like a damp weight on my skin. I know I have been stressed. I know the gala was intense, but I just want us to be happy. I am fighting for us. I looked at his hand. It was the hand of a man who had signed fraudulent invoices and touched another woman's face, and now he was using it to anchor me to his lie. That is interesting, I said, withdrawing my hand slowly to pick up my wine glass. Because I heard a rumor today. I heard the compliance department at Blackwell and Crane is running a random audit on travel reimbursements this quarter. The reaction was instantaneous. He did not choke, but he froze. It was a complete stillness, like a video paused on a frame. The chewing stopped. The blinking stopped. For 2 seconds. Graham Rourke was not a charming consultant. He was a deer hearing the click of a safety latch release in the dark. Why? Why would you hear that, he asked, his voice tight. I did not answer. Instead, I reached under my placemat and pulled out a single photograph. I did not throw it. I placed it gently on the table and slid it across the mahogany surface until it rested next to his wine glass. It was the photo Mallory had taken. Graham, in his signature navy coat, walking into the lobby of the Kensington Lofts. He was holding a key fob. He looked comfortable. He looked like he lived there. Graham looked down. His face went from pale to a flushed, blotchy red. The vein in his forehead began to pulse. He did not look at me with guilt. He looked at me with fury. You had me followed, he hissed. The sweetness was gone, replaced by the snarl I had seen at the party. You hired someone to stalk me. I picked up my napkin and dabbed the corner of my mouth. You stood in the center of a ballroom and screamed at me to apologize to a stranger, I said, my voice steady and cool. You humiliated me in front of the entire city. Did you really think I still owed you my blind trust? He stood up so abruptly that his chair scraped loudly against the floorboards. He pointed a finger at me, his face twisted. This is exactly why he shouted, "You are so cold, Rowan. You are impossible to live with. You treat this marriage like a business arrangement. You drove me to this. You made me find comfort somewhere else because you stopped being a wife years ago. It was a classic maneuver. Gaslighting. He was trying to make his betrayal my fault. He wanted me to cry, to apologize, to beg him to stay. I did not blink. I stood up and began to stack the plates. Comfort is one thing. Graham, I said, looking him dead in the eye. But building a fake life on stolen money is another. He went silent. His mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. He realized, perhaps for the first time, that I knew more than just the address of an apartment. Tomorrow, I said, turning toward the sink with the dirty dishes, I am going to have a conversation with a few people who are involved in this mess. I need to know who is using whom. Sleep well, Graham. I walked into the kitchen, leaving him standing alone in the candlelight, staring at the photograph as if it were a death warrant. Marlon Voss, the head of compliance for Blackwell and Crane, was a man who prided himself on being untouchable. He sat behind a glass desk that looked more like a barrier than furniture. I did not sit down. I simply opened my portfolio and laid a single sheet of paper in front of him. It was a timeline. On the left were the dates of Graham's reimbursement requests. On the right were the dates of transfers into Vale Meridian LLC, followed immediately by purchases of jewelry, luxury hotel stays, and cash withdrawals. I am not here to discuss my marriage. Mr. Voss, I said, my voice devoid of tremor. I am here to discuss the fact that your firm has been funneling unauthorized funds into a shell company for 16 months. The total is $142,000. Marlon picked up the paper. He adjusted his cufflinks, a nervous tick. He scanned the columns. When his eyes hit the match between the vendor fees and the deposits, his face went the color of ash. Mrs. Rourke, surely this is a misunderstanding, he stammered, though his eyes betrayed him. We investigated this. You buried it, I corrected him. And I have a journalist named Sloan Mercer who is ready to publish an article titled The Compliance Culture of Corruption at Blackwell and Crane tomorrow morning. Unless you act. Marlon looked up. He realized the walls were closing in. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Look, Mrs. Rourke," Graham told us the external consultant. "Miss Vale. She was the one padding the invoices. He sent us an email last week claiming he found discrepancies in her billing. He's building a case to fire her." A chill went down my spine that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. Graham was not just stealing. He was setting Tessa up. He was planting the evidence so that when the house of cards fell, she would be buried under the rubble while he walked away as the diligent manager who caught the thief. I left the office with my blood running cold. Graham was more dangerous than I thought. He was not just a liar. He was a cannibal. I met Evan later that afternoon in his car. He looked sleepless. He handed me his phone without a word. There was a text message from Tessa, sent 20 minutes ago. "Evan, please, we need to talk. I made a mistake. I can fix this. I can explain everything. Just don't do anything crazy until I see you." "She's panicked," Evan said, staring at the screen. "She never texts me during the day." "She isn't panicking because she misses you." "Evan," I said, "she is panicking because Graham is freezing her out. She senses the shift. She wants to confess to you so she can spin the story before you find out the truth on your own. When a thief offers to tell you everything, they are usually trying to sell you a lie to buy time." I went home early. I knew Graham would be making calls. I walked into the house and moved silently to the hallway outside his study. The door was cracked open an inch. I pulled out my phone and hit record. Graham was pacing. I could hear his heavy footsteps on the hardwood. "You have to close the file." Marlon Graham shouted into the phone. I told you she went rogue. Tessa is the one who signed the invoices. If she talks, everything dies. You have to cut her loose now." He was desperate. His voice cracked on the last word. He wasn't trying to save his marriage. He wasn't trying to save his reputation. He was trying to stay out of prison. I stopped the recording. I had it. I had his voice confirming the conspiracy, confirming the cover-up, and confirming his intent to frame his partner. I went to the guest room and locked the door. I uploaded the recording to the secure cloud. Then, I attached the audio file, the bank statements, and the photos of the shell company registration to an email addressed to Dana Huxley. I typed a short message, "Do not settle. We are going for full destruction of credibility. Arrange the meeting for tomorrow at 9 in the morning, at the house. Tell him it is unavoidable." Tomorrow was the day Graham was expecting to be announced as the new senior partner at Marrow Bridge Consulting. He thought he was ascending to the throne. He did not know I had just rigged the throne with explosives. I closed my laptop and listened to the silence of the house. It was the heavy, pressurized silence of the moment before the bomb detonates. Graham brought Tessa into our home at 9 in the morning. He opened the front door with a jarring confidence, ushering her inside as if she were a dignitary and I were the unruly servant who needed to be disciplined. Tessa looked pale, wearing a beige trench coat that was belted too tightly. She refused to make eye contact with me, her gaze fixed on the floorboards. I stood by the kitchen island, drinking coffee. I did not offer them a seat. "Rowan," Graham said, his voice dropping into that deep, authoritative register he used when he wanted to intimidate a junior consultant. "We are not going to drag this out. You humiliated Tessa. You have made our work environment hostile. I brought her here so you can do the right thing in private. Clear the air." He took a step closer, his hand sliding into his jacket pocket. I saw the faint outline of his phone. He was not just asking for an apology, he was recording. He wanted a soundbite of me admitting fault, a confession he could play for HR or a divorce judge to paint me as the unstable aggressor. "You want me to apologize," I stated flatly. "I want you to own your actions," Graham said, stepping aside so I had a clear line of sight to Tessa. "Look at her and say it. Say, 'I am sorry for hurting you, Tessa.'" "That is all it takes." Tessa looked up then, her eyes wet and wide. She looked terrified. She looked like a woman who knew the walls were made of paper and someone was holding a match. I smiled. It was a small, sharp thing. You want an apology? I asked softly. Okay. Listen to this. I picked up my tablet and unlocked it. I did not speak. I simply slid it across the marble countertop until it rested directly in front of Tessa. The screen was glowing with the forensic timeline I had built. It showed the dates. It showed the transfers. It showed the $142,000 funneled from Blackwell and Crane into her shell company, and the corresponding withdrawals made by Graham. What? What is this? Tessa whispered. She looked at the screen, and her face crumbled. It was not the weeping of a victim. It was the hyperventilating panic of an accomplice who realizes she has been left holding the bag. Graham, you said this was untraceable. It is, Graham snapped, lunging forward to grab the tablet. No, it isn't, a voice said from the hallway. Graham froze. Tessa let out a choked sob. Evan Vale walked into the kitchen. I had let him in through the back door 10 minutes earlier. He stood next to me, his arms crossed, his face a mask of cold, exhausted fury. The visual was striking, the two betrayed spouses standing shoulder to shoulder, looking down at the two people who had stolen their lives. Tessa stared at her husband. Evan, please, let me explain. There is nothing to explain, Evan said, his voice devoid of warmth. I saw the signatures. Tessa, I saw how you used me to sign for the LLC. You made me an accessory to fraud. Graham looked from Evan to me, and for the first time, I saw genuine fear in his eyes. The control was gone. The script was shredded. He began to shake, his face turning a violent shade of red. He realized he wasn't the director of this scene anymore. He lashed out. He reverted to the only weapon he had left. He pointed a trembling finger at my face and screamed, his voice cracking with desperation. Apologize to her or get out. The words echoed off the high ceilings, just like they had at the gala. But this time, there was no crowd to judge me. There was only the cold, hard truth filling the room. It sounded pathetic. It sounded like the last gasp of a drowning man. I looked at him with absolute pity. I will get out, Graham, I said, my voice steady and clear. I am walking out of your life right now. But before I go, I am putting the truth exactly where it belongs. Graham lunged for me, trying to snatch the tablet, but he was too late. My phone buzzed on the counter. It was a confirmation from Dana. The emergency motion for full financial disclosure had been filed. The email to the compliance board had been delivered. It is already sent. I said, to Blackwell and Crane, to the partners at Marrowbridge, and to the IRS. Graham stopped. He looked at the tablet, then at me, realizing the absolute finality of what I had done. I picked up my purse. I did not look back at him. I walked past Tessa, who was weeping silently into her hands, and walked to the front door. I paused only to leave a thick manila envelope on the entry table. Inside was the separation agreement and a list of the media outlets that would receive Sloane's article in the morning. I opened the door and stepped out into the fresh, clean air. Behind me, the house was silent. I had walked out, just as he asked, but I had left the fire burning inside. The boardroom at Marrowbridge Consulting was air-conditioned to a crisp 68 degrees. Graham sat at the head of the mahogany table, adjusting his cufflinks. He believed this meeting was a formality to confirm his promotion to senior partner. He had his speech prepared. He had his smile practiced. But when the double doors opened, the CEO did not walk in with a bottle of champagne. Instead, the general counsel entered, flanked by 2 external auditors and a stern-faced representative from Blackwell and Crane. Graham stood up, his smile faltering. Gentlemen, I thought we were discussing the quarterly projections. We are discussing the immediate suspension of your contract pending a federal investigation into wire fraud and embezzlement, the general counsel said. He did not offer a handshake. He placed a stack of papers on the table. They were the printouts I had left in the envelope. At the same moment, Phones around the table began to buzz. Sloan Mercer had hit publish. The headline of the Harbor Line Ledger did not read "Local Husband Cheats on Wife." It read, "The Shell Game." How local consultants funneled corporate funds into fake vendors. Graham could not spin this as a domestic dispute. He could not claim I was a jealous, hysterical woman. The numbers on the screen were cold, hard, and criminal. Graham looked at the papers, his face draining of color until he looked like a corpse. He tried to speak, but his voice failed him. The narrative had been stripped from his hands. Later that afternoon, in the sterile conference room of Dana Huxley's law office, the final act played out. Tessa was there with her own lawyer, trying to cut a deal. She was weeping, pointing a shaking finger at Graham. "He made me do it," she sobbed. "He told me how to set up the accounts. I was just doing what he said." But Dana slid a single document across the table. It was the registration for Vale Meridian LLC. This company was formed 16 months ago. Dana said calmly, "That is 4 months before you met Graham Rourke. You didn't set this up for him. Tessa, you set it up to trap him. You targeted him because you knew he was arrogant enough to think he could get away with it." Graham froze. He turned to look at Tessa. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. He had destroyed his marriage for a woman who had not loved him, but had simply identified him as a useful mark. He did not have 2 women fighting over him. He had a wife who had audited him and a mistress who had conned him. He looked at me then. His eyes were red-rimmed and desperate. He leaned forward, ignoring his lawyer's hand on his arm. "Rowan, please," he whispered. "Don't do this. Think of our daughter. Don't destroy her future because you are angry at me." It was his last card, the guilt trip. I looked at him, feeling absolutely nothing. The anger was gone. The love was gone. All that remained was clarity. "Our daughter's future does not rely on your fake reputation, Graham," I said. "It relies on the truth. And it relies on her mother ensuring she is safe from a man who would mortgage her stability to buy a diamond bracelet for a con artist." Graham slumped back in his chair. He looked at the mountain of evidence. The bank statements, the audio recording, the witness testimony from Evan. He realized there was no exit. He picked up the pen. His hand trembled so violently that the signature on the separation agreement looked like a jagged scar. He agreed to full financial restitution, total transparency, and he signed over the house. He did not sign it because he was sorry. He signed it because I had locked every other door. Evan left Tessa that same day. He walked away with his dignity, and I kept my promise to keep the children out of the mud. They would never know the details. They would only know that their parents were happier apart. I went back to the house one last time. It was quiet. I walked to the hallway where our wedding photo hung. I took it down. I did not smash it. I did not rip it. I simply placed it in a box and taped it shut. It was not a tragedy anymore. It was just a lesson I had finished learning. I stood in the foyer and remembered the moment at the gala. I remembered the heat of the lights and the sound of his voice screaming at me. "Apologize to her or get out." I smiled. I had done exactly what he asked. I had apologized to the woman I used to be for tolerating him for so long. And then, I had gotten out. He just didn't realize that when I walked out the door. I was opening the gate to his worst nightmare. Thank you so much for listening to this story on Mia Revenge Stories. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today, so please leave a comment below with your city or country so we can connect. If you enjoyed seeing justice served, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and smash the hype button to help this story reach even more people.